Hello and welcome to another teaching on the so-called Zadok calendar. My name is Wouter-Jan van den Berg and it's been a while since I made my last teaching, so welcome back, or welcome if you're for the first time here. The reason for this presentation is not so much new information, new insights, new knowledge, although that might be present in this teaching to some extent. The main reason for this presentation is a video teaching by Brian Hook of Truth on the Web Ministries called Sunburned, Zadok/Enoch Solar Calendar Refuted, in which he claims that the Zadok calendar is not in line with Scripture. Before I start discussing his criticism, I would like to express that I have no intention to judge any person at all. I'm only testing what is said by Brian and how. In fact, I never heard of him or his ministry before. So what I will say about this teaching doesn't cover his or their other teachings necessarily. I mean, I haven't watched these teachings yet. So they might even be very interesting. I just don't know. Secondly, I do not represent any ministry. I can just share what I have learned at a personal level. Okay, what will we discuss then? First of all, in how far does Brian represent the Zadok calendar in a correct way? Secondly, what are his main questions and objections mentioned in his teaching? And thirdly, do we indeed have a problem? Okay, first agenda item. Well, the correct presentation of the Zadok calendar should include, to my opinion, an overview of these things you are seeing right now. So we always see 360 days per year plus 4 intercalary days for the solstices and equinoxes. We always have 12 months per year. The year always starts at the 4th day of the week on a Wednesday, the day when the big lights were created. There is some discussion whether it is the Wednesday closest to or directly after the spring equinox, or whether it is the first Wednesday after the equilux. I will discuss these two items in a few minutes. So the equinox and the equilux. Sorry, the equilux and the equinox. For most followers of the Zadok calendar, the day starts in the morning. It is not possible that any Moedim, any festival, will land on a Shabbat. You don't have to come up with certain regulations like it is in the Hillel calendar. The first fruit of barley is always presented on a fixed date, the 26th of Aviv. It's not the day of the harvest. I will come back to that. There is a difference of 8 days. And the main festivals, Passover, Shavuot, and Feast of Tabernacles, are always on the 15th of the month, whether the 1st, 3rd, or 7th. And this calendar is based on the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch, and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah, like I said, equinox or equilux, there is a difference. Equinox, you could say, is the more scientific definition of equal night and equal day. That is, when day and night are supposedly having an equal length of 12 hours each. Equilux, on the other hand, is more what you perceive, what you see in reality. So the time when day and night are actually equal, which is earlier for 2 reasons. First of all, at equinox, the measurement is taken from the center of the sun at the horizon. However, it is the top edge of the sun which is visible first at sunrise and last at sunset. So before it is at this center, you already see the sun in the morning when it is rising, and you still see it at sunset. And even, that's the second reason, due to light refraction, there is still light for a time when the sun is no longer visible after sunset. This both adds extra time to daylight hours. Hence, the equinox is before the equinox. Roughly speaking, 3 to 4 days, depending on the location where you are. And here you can see a basic outline of the calendar from another website than Brian mentioned. Has been quite useful for me when I started studying the Zadok calendar. It's the website torahslight.org. I really recommend studying this site. Although we have a difference on the question, different answer on the question when to start the year, but never mind. That's just one difference. Yes, why is this useful, this website? Well, for several reasons. And one of the things I found there is this overview of the calendar for the year. So it's very easy to see that, for instance, in the first month, the month starts with a Wednesday, and then the second day of the month is a Thursday, and then a Friday, and so on. So you can easily see that the structure is there for every year. It doesn't change. So just to be clear on that, in the Zadok calendar there is no floating Shabbat. It is the Saturday. Also, when you can also present it in another way, like this way, and then you see again that there is a certain structure. You do have 52 Shabbats per year, and you see a repeating pattern. For the 1st, the 4th, the 7th, and the 10th month, it's always on the 4th, the 11th, the 18th, and the 25th, sorry. For the 2nd, 5th, 8th, and 11th month, it's always a Shabbat on the 2nd, the 9th, the 16th, the 23rd, and the 30th. And for the 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 12th month, it's always a Shabbat on the 7th, 14th, 21st, and 28th. So, yeah, a very structured calendar, you could say. There is a certain piece, a certain order. And to me, this complies with the nature of Yahweh. Our God is a God of order, not of chaos. So simply put, it attracted me from the start. Do we see any of this in the presentation of Brian? No, we don't. Only some verses from Enoch and Jubilees and a few screenshots from one website, which are presented as being in conflict with these verses, mainly because Brian is claiming they do not keep the rhythm of 364 days per year. And then he directly moves on with several questions, which we will address later on. To me, it seems Brian is more looking for hiccups and holes than he is to learn to know the Zadok calendar. There is maybe a thin line between asking questions because you don't understand on the one hand, and raising objections because you are somehow disturbed by what is said and cannot believe it on the other hand. Yeah, I had to think of the difference between Zechariah and Miriam at the beginning of the New Testament. But okay, there can be a thin line, which I fully understand because it is quite revolutionary to let go of Hillel or any other calendar and switch to Zadok. But maybe you should admit that first, well, not to me necessarily, but to yourself before discussing something you obviously don't understand yet. I don't want to be harsh, no offense meant, but in the teaching you shared with us, Brian, I can't see that you have studied the Zadok calendar thoroughly. Your teaching is more about your own criticism than it is about presenting the Zadok calendar in the correct way. So, answer to the first question, was there a correct presentation of the Zadok calendar? No, not at all. Okay, let's move on to the questions and objections from Truth and the Web Ministries. If I'm right, there are 9 questions and objections from Ryan. I might have missed something, but I don't think that is the case. But please let me know if so. First question, Brian is posing is that nowhere in Enoch or Jubilees do we find a mention of the equinox, so why do they start their calendar on the first Wednesday after the equinox? That's Brian's first question. Then, nowhere in Enoch or Jubilees do we find a mention of an intercalation week, so why would we need to apply that? And thirdly, did God accept the priesthood at the temple? According to Brian, he did, because Zechariah, descendant of Aaron, served in the temple. Fourthly, wasn't Jesus raised keeping the temple timing? And if they, being the disciples, did not keep the temple calendar, how is it then that they all observe the same Pentecost in Acts 2 and 3? Fifthly, did he not keep the same great last day as the Jews did in John 7? Sixthly, what day did our Father offer his lamb? Was it not the very day that they offered their lambs in the temple? Seventh objection, the wave sheaf of first fruits. That cannot have been on the 26th of the first month, if we look at what Israel did as described in Joshua 5, according to Ryan. If you're new to this, you need some explanation here, but I will certainly do that. Not yet. I'm just presenting now the questions of Brian. The eighth remark is that the 150 days of the flood would not be true using the Zadok calendar, according to Brian. And the last objection is that we do not have 12 months per year per se, but sometimes a 13th month, as described in Ezekiel. Well, that's Brian's opinion, not mine. Well, to be honest, most of these questions I already dealt with in several teachings that I already uploaded at my channel on YouTube. You can see that here. There are only two objections that I did not really discuss yet. So I could do an easy job for myself and only discuss objection 5 and 8 and refer to previous teachings for the remaining 7 questions and objections. But let's be kind and discuss them all. Otherwise, I have an easy job, but Brian and others that are apparently quite new to Zadok, a very tedious one. It is more convenient for them to have all questions answered in one presentation, at least to a certain degree. Besides, criticism has a positive effect. Well, it had a positive effect for me in this case. It made me wonder if I could simplify certain answers that I gave before, and it even leads to new knowledge sometimes, and it did so in this case. So, in a way, I'm thankful for your criticism, Brian, really. Okay, let's evaluate it now. Yeah, why to use the equinox? Because nowhere in Enoch or Jubilees do we find a mention of it, do we? So why do we start the year on the first Wednesday after the equinox? Well, like I said before, this is not necessarily what they do. Some start after the equinox, some as close to the equinox as possible. Neither equinox or equinox is literally mentioned in Enoch or Jubilees. That's true, but it is an interpretation of what is written in the book of Enoch when he writes about equal day and equal night. In chapter 72, on that day, the day is equalized with the night, and the night amounts to 9 parts, and the day to 9 parts. Chapter 72, verse 20 and 21. And in verse 32 and 33, it is written, on that day, the night decreases and amounts to 9 parts, and the day to 9 parts, and the night is equal to the day, and the year is exactly as to its days 364. So yes, the equinox is not mentioned, meaning, as far as I'm concerned, there is no unity yet, but room for different interpretations. But bear in mind, remember that the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1947, and the Zadok calendar is even more recent, which is far more recent than other calendars like Hilal. So give us some time to find out, I would say. More on this in my teaching, When to Start a Year, in which I address these different opinions. Okay. So for the first question, I would say, although the equinox is not literally mentioned, it is mentioned in another way. It is described, you could say. So that even though that exact label is not mentioned, you can still see it's there. Okay, let's move on to the intercalation week, because according to Brian, it's also not mentioned in Enoch Jubilee. So why should we use it? Well, first of all, any calendar needs to adjust for the 365.25 days per year somehow. That's the amount of days that the Earth needs to orbit the Sun. This is not a unique issue. In the Gregorian calendar, we have an extra day in February each 4th year. Well, roughly speaking, that is. And as I will show later on, the only witness we have for the intercalation month, for the Hillel calendar, is a fake one. Besides, it is very well possible and highly likely there was no need to apply intercalation till a certain moment. Otherwise, the Book of Enoch, Jubilees, and/or the Dead Sea Scrolls would have surely mentioned it. It is guessing what would have been the cause for intercalation. Since the Dead Sea Scrolls do not mention it either, it is unlikely it was caused by events before the Dead Sea Scrolls, like the flood, the extra day Joshua was given to fight the enemies he was chasing, or the sun moving backwards with Hezekiah. I think you are familiar. I hope you are familiar with those stories. We just simply don't know yet, but in the light of all the evidence and scriptural proof, how logical it would be to disqualify Zadok for this reason only. So yes, Brian, you do have a certain point. It is not mentioned, but it is not a unique issue for this calendar only. And yeah, it might have been that we did not need it in the past, but we just don't know yet. Okay, third question, did God accept the priesthood? According to Brian, he did. So yeah, that would imply that we need to stick to the calendar that was the calendar, which was the calendar of the priesthood at that time. That's of course the implication. But to me, the mere fact that the priest of Aaron served is no issue. The main question is, what was the majority doing and who was the high priest? That's even more important. And it's not only a question whether he was a Levite or a descendant from Aaron. To me, the main question is, was he the high priest from the lineage of Zadok? Because that is the lineage, that was the priest that was appointed by Solomon instead of Abiathar, as we can see in 1 Kings 2, verse 35. And even if he was a Levite, we know the high priesthood of Caiaphas ended the moment he tore his clothes. The priesthood of Caiaphas was replaced by Melchizedek. This was announced in the book of Ezekiel and confirmed in the letter to the Hebrews. Just check out what is written in Ezekiel 44, verse 13 and 15. They, the Levites, will not approach me to serve me in the office of Kohen. However, the Kohanim, who are descendants of Zadok, who took care of my sanctuary when the people of Israel went astray from me, they are the ones who will approach me and serve me. It is they who will attend me and offer me the fat and the blood, says Adonai Elohim. And in the letter to the Hebrews, we can see these verses. Therefore, if it had been possible to reach the goal through the system of Kohanim derived from Levi, since in connection with the people were given the Torah, what need would there have been for another different kind of Kohen, the one spoken of as to be compared with Melchizedek, and not to be compared with Aharon? For if the system of Kohanim is transformed, there must of necessity occur a transformation of Torah. Also, the post of high priest had already become a matter of the Roman Empire in the time of Caiaphas and Zechariah. In other words, a political appointment. They had to confirm the high priest. By the way, where do we read that Yeshua, or Jesus as Brian is calling him, accepted this priesthood? Yeshua surely accepted Yohanan the Immerser, possibly a Zadokite, a descendant from Zadok, since he was baptized by him. But Yeshua only opposed the Pharisees and Sadducees, aka the priests of that time, if I'm correct. So no, I don't think God accepted the priesthood of that time. Implying also that it was very likely Jesus was also not raised keeping the temple time. And it's very likely then that the disciples did not keep the temple calendar also. But if that's not the case, Brian would ask, and did ask, how is it then possible that they all observed the same Pentecost? Okay, two questions here. A few answers from my side. First of all, the text from scripture that Brian shares show very clearly it is in some cases about a festival of the Jews. See, for instance, John 5 and John 11. So not necessarily of Yahweh, of God. In cases this is not explicitly mentioned, it could have been the same date, because there is a possibility for a synchronization for two calendars running in parallel. Since different calendars can start the year on different dates, they can still have overlap, as we already noticed in 2022 and 2025 with first fruits of barley and Shavuot. If you start the year later but celebrate first fruits earlier, like you do in Hillel, you can have that. Also, if you start the year together on the same Gregorian date, you celebrate Pesach and unleavened bread at the same time or almost at the same time, as we already noticed when we discussed the timeline of Pesach when Yeshua died. Well, we noticed that in one of my earlier teachings. These are the two main options for almost complete overlap. Besides that, we can expect partial overlap, especially with festivals that last 7 days, like the Festival of Tabernacles or unleavened bread. Yeah, this is the basic outline of the festivals according to the biblical calendar. And then it seems that you will have overlap with Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur, because in both calendars it's on the 1st and the 10th of the month. But of course, that will not be the case if you start the year on different dates and celebrate first fruits of barley at different dates. Then the overlap is different. Then you can have overlap like you are seeing here with first fruits of barley and Shavuot, as we had in 2022 and also this year. 2025, or you can have partial overlap with Pesach and unleavened bread and Festival of Tabernacles, as you can see here. So with that in mind, maybe check again those verses like John 2, verse 23, where it is written, now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover, many believed in his name when they saw the miracles which he did. Maybe it was at the same time, or maybe it was a Jews' Passover. We don't know. And in John 11, it's even explicitly mentioned it is a Jews' Passover, so not necessarily one from Yahweh. So yeah, to me, we don't have proof that Yahweh followed the same calendar as the Jews did. And we will see that when I will address the other questions. Like this question, the fifth question, did he not keep the same great last day? Well, first of all, just look at the slide Brian is showing. He contradicts himself as far as I'm concerned, since the day after the last day is indeed the Shabbat, and it is the 22nd, not the 23rd. By the way, in a way, this question is related to the previous question, since it is both about timing and the possibility or impossibility of different calendars running synchronized for a while. Yeah, this is a screenshot from his teaching, and I think you can quite clearly see that the last great day is the 22nd and not the 23rd. Sorry, the last great day is the 21st. So the day after the last great day is 22nd, not 23rd. By the way, Did Yeshua keep the Festival of Tabernacles at the same time? This is one of the reasons I'm thankful for the criticism of Brian, because it made me read those verses, well, with some new light, you could say. I suddenly realized that it's very likely that he did not celebrate it at the same time. In a way, I already knew that. I already realized that because, as far as I'm concerned, Yeshua did not follow the calendar of the Jews. But if you read those verses here again, you might experience the same goosebump moment that I had when I read those verses again. Because it is written here that Yeshua is saying to his brethren, you go up to the festival as for me, I am not going up now because the right time for me has not yet come. But after this, brothers had gone up to the festival. He too went up, not publicly, but in secret. And then I wrote it in brackets and, in italics and bold. Not until the festival was half over did Yeshua go. Why would he have done that? Remember the partial overlap in 2023. Hillel was already halfway when Zadok started with the Festival of Tabernacles. Wow, maybe that was the same when Yeshua celebrated it in his time. Okay, we're already at the sixth objection. What day did our father offer his lamb? Was it not the very day that they offered their lambs in the temple? So it's still about the timing. It's still about the question, which calendar did Yeshua follow? Because that should, of course, be the calendar we should follow. Well, in a way, I agree with what you say, Brian, because I think it was on the same day, but it was not in the year 33, but in the year 30. Because then we see a synchronization with Pesach, since both calendars had the same date for Aviv 1. And I will share a few slides from my earlier teachings here to prove that. So as far as I'm concerned, Yeshua celebrated Pesach at the appointed time according to his own calendar, which was on the evening of the 14th of Aviv, and was the Passover lamb at the appointed time according to the calendar of the Jews at that time, because they started their calendar in the evening. So it was still to them the 14th of Aviv the next morning. Yeah, but that calendar of the Jews is a certain impossibility. For instance, if you look at this verse, now the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying unto him, where wilt thou that we prepare for thee to eat the Passover? Matthew 26, verse 17. And the disciples did as Jesus had appointed them, and they made ready the Passover. And when the even was come, he sat down with the 12. So that was on the evening of the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So we see that the disciples began preparations during the day, because in the evening it is Pesach. And we know from Exodus that unleavened bread began on the evening on the 14th of Aviv. So day one ended before the evening of the 15th of Aviv, with the 15th of Aviv being a rest day. So the only option here, according to me, is that the 14th of Aviv started already in the morning. Otherwise, it is not the first day of unleavened bread, but one day before, as we can see here. Then it would have been the 13th of Aviv, and that's not according to Torah. So again, an indication, a proof that a day does not start in the evening, but in the morning. Yeah, that might be a shock for you to realize if you're not familiar with that. And I can understand that, because when I joined the Messianic movement, I also learned that a day starts in the evening. But later on, especially when I started studying the Zadok calendar, I came to the realization that that's not true, and that's one of the remnants, you could say, from the Babylonian captivity Israel has been in. Please watch my teaching called Solar Calendar Part 2 for more information on this. I would like to move on now. And I would like to come back to the possible overlap of calendars. Yeah, if you have been watching in a good way, you might have noticed that we can have overlap with Pesach and unleavened bread, or we can have overlap with Festival of First Fruits and Shavuot, but not with both. So in the year Yeshua died, was resurrected and ascended to heaven, 30 AD, we either have Aviv 1 and Pesach in parallel, or First Fruits and Shavuot, not both. That might seem to be a problem for the story in Acts 2, because that's in the same year. And how can we have overlap with Shavuot then? Because I already argued that we have overlap with Pesach. Well, it can still be the case, because to me, the story in Acts 2 and 3 is not about Shavuot, but about something else. Just look at the thematic connections, and you might not be so sure anymore about your idea that we are talking about Shavuot of barley in Acts 2 and 3. If we look at the thematic connections between the story of the golden calf and the celebration in Jerusalem, we see that it is both about wine, and we also see that it's both about 3,000 people either being killed or being resurrected to life. That's part of another teaching, but as I explained in that teaching, Pentecost was most likely not Shavuot, but 7 weeks later. And the Dead Sea Scrolls explain it is the festival of new wine. But yeah, that's more for another teaching, so I would like to move on here to the seventh objection. The wave sheaf of first fruits that cannot have been on the 26th of the first month, if you look at what Israel did as described in Joshua 5, verse 10 to 12. Yeah, Brian, at first glance, this seems to be an issue. It was an issue for me as well. I have to be honest here, when I started studying the Zadok calendar, but it isn't. But yeah, it was a brain breaker for me as well, because one of the things you learn after joining the Messianic movement is that Yeshua, or Yahushua, is the fulfillment of the first fruit of barley. That is the reason why Miriam wasn't allowed to touch him, because he had to be presented to waved before his father first. So he went to heaven twice, not only on the so-called Ascension Day, but also before, on Sunday, the 18th of Aviv. How to combine that with a wave offering at the 26th? Sorry. Yeah, I was slightly hesitating here. Sunday the 18th, let's go back here. Yeah, Sunday is not correct. It's a Saturday. Otherwise, the 26th is not a Sunday. So sorry for that error. I do believe Yeshua was resurrected on the Shabbat, not on a Sunday. Let's be clear on that. Okay, coming back to the brain breaker. It got worse. Israel was only allowed to eat of the harvest after presenting the wave offering. So what would they eat for bread after the end of the Feast of Unleavened Bread at the 22nd of Aviv till the wave offering at the 26th? Still unleavened bread or no bread at all? Also, how to combine this with Joshua 5, in which it is stated that they eat of the harvest of the land directly after Pesach, which is on the 14th of Aviv. directly after Pesach is definitely not the 26th, of course, but the 15th of Aviv. Yeah, here you have those verses from Joshua 5. The people of Israel camped at Gilgal, and they observed Pesach on the 14th of the month there on the plains of Jericho. The day after Pesach, they ate what the land produced, matzah and roasted ears of grain that day. And how to combine that with what is written in Leviticus 23, verse 11, 12, and 14. Tell the people of Israel, after you enter the land I am giving you and harvest its ripe crops, you are to bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the Kohen. He is to wave the sheaf before Adonai, so that you will be accepted. The Kohen is to wave it on the day after the Shabbat. You are not to eat bread, dried grain, or fresh grain until the day you bring the offering for your God. This is a permanent regulation through all your generations, no matter where you live. Well, after several days and praying, it became simple to me. First of all, Joshua, of course, didn't do anything against Torah. The wave offering was only to be presented in the tabernacle at its destination chosen by the Lord, as we can read in Deuteronomy 12. And as we know, Joshua first fought for several years. The scholars are not sure whether it's 5 or 7 or something in between, but okay, 5 to 7 years until the tabernacle was placed in Shiloh. Also, the wave offering had to be of the harvest of their own seed, so not of pagan seed, as we can read in Exodus 23, verse 14 to 19. Deuteronomy 12, verse 10, when you cross the Jordan and live in the land Adonai, your God, is having you inherit, and he gives you rest from all your surrounding enemies, so after the wars, so that you are living in safety, then you will bring all that I am ordering you to the place Adonai, your God, chooses to have his name live. You burnt offerings, sacrifices, tents, the offering from your hand, and all your best possessions that you dedicate to Adonai. Okay, the Joshua issue, you could say, has been resolved, but what about the date of the wave sheaf offering, the first fruits of barley? Is it now the 18th or the 26th? That's a difference of 8 days. Well, that's important. Because why assume that the first fruit is offered at the same day it is harvested? Why do we forget that the first fruit always had to be presented at the 8th day? Sorry, I had to sneeze. Yes, like I said, why do we forget that the first fruit always had to be presented at the 8th day? This is the case for the firstborn of the cattle, the firstborn son, the day of circumcision, the day of consecration of Aaron and his sons, etc. So why would it be different for the firstborn of the seed? So even if Yeshua was risen from the dead at the 18th of Aviv, on the Shabbat that is, he was only to be presented to his Father in heaven 8 days later, so the 26th. Is this confirmed by Scripture? Well, I think it is, because in John 20, verse 90-27, we read not only that Miriam is prohibited to touch him shortly after his resurrection, but also we don't read that any of his disciples touched him when he first appeared to them. Only Thomas was allowed to do that. When was that? Yes, indeed, 8 days later. John 20, verse 90-27. Here some verses from that chapter. Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, where the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews, came Jesus and stood in their midst. And after 8 days again, his disciples were within, and Thomas with them. Then came Jesus and said to Thomas, reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side, and be not faithless, but believing. So we have one witness now from the renewed covenant. Do we have another witness, whether in the Bible or in Jubilees or Enoch? Sure. If we read Jubilees 15 verse 1 or 16 verse 13, we can read that Shavuot is always at the midst of the third month. And if you calculate back, you always end up at the 26th. If you calculate back for 7 Shabbats, that is. And 7 Shabbats, you need to calculate from the first fruits of barley till the first fruits of wheat, till Shavuot, which is misspelled here, I can see now, but okay. Okay, almost at the end, 2 objections left. The 8th objection, 150 days of flood with Noah. That cannot be true using Zadok. Well, if this would be the case, then the same would go for the 1260 days, 42 months, and times, and half a time, 1290 days, and 1335 days in Daniel and Revelation. My simple answer would be that the intercalary days for the equinoxes and solstices should not be counted when counting these 150 days, or any other set of days. A more complex answer is, based on opinions of others as well as my own research, we might think of the Zadok months as 30, 30, 31 days, but that's not the case. It should be 30, 30, 30. It is 91 days per quarter, but it should be read as 30, 30, 30 plus 1, because those 4 intercalary days are not counted in the months, they are counted in the years. So both is true. We have 30 days per month, 12 months per year, and 36 days per year plus 4 intercalary days, which is confirmed by the book of Enoch. Enoch 82, verse 9 to 12, we can see that it is written that he is talking about the 360 days and the 4 intercalary days. And sorry, I was distracted. And if we go back to chapter 72, we can read that Enoch is also talking about 364 days. So both are true. By the way, the Dead Sea Scrolls confirm the story of Noah, as you can read in 4Q 252, column 1, verse 7, where it is written, 150 days did the waters hold sway over the earth. So, no, it's not a problem, those 150 days, I would say. Finally, do we have a 13th month sometimes, as mentioned in Ezekiel? Well, it's not mentioned there, but okay. According to Brian and others, we can see that it is there if we start calculating. Okay, and I will do the calculation and show you that's not correct. I already did, to be honest, in my second teaching on the Zadok calendar, in which I compared this calendar with others. My conclusion, long story short, we only have one witness and it is unreliable. And with that, I do not mean, of course, that Ezekiel is unreliable, but the interpretation of Ezekiel is unreliable. But okay, Ezekiel was told to lie on the side for 430 days, 390 for Israel and 40 for Judah. In Hillel, that could have been 1 year and 3 months, if the year would have had 353 days, plus 58 days for 2 months, plus 1 extra month of 29 days, and then we have 430 days exactly. Although it seems, based on Ezekiel, that we have only 1 year and 2 months, because we start at the 5th day of the 4th month in the 5th year, and then we end up at the 5th day of the 6th month of the 6th year. But in Ezekiel 8, we read that he was sitting, so that should have been after those 430 days. And if it is 1 year and 2 months after, we need an extra month, otherwise the 430 days would not be over yet. Well, not so quickly. We only have one witness and it is not reliable. First of all, 430 days is 1 year and 3 months on Hillel, assuming too many things. 353 days per year instead of 354, and 2 times 29 days instead of 2 times 29.5, which is roughly the amount of days you have when you use a lunar calendar. Also, maybe more important, Ezekiel did not start with lying on the side on the 5th of the 4th month. He started at least 7 days later. Just check out Ezekiel 3, verse 15. And finally, was he sitting or was he just dwelling in his house in Ezekiel 8? And dwelling can be anything. So you need to track the Hebrew word here, because dwelling can mean sitting, standing, or lying. So maybe he was still lying on his side. And that would have been quite appropriate, because then he would have been lying on his side for Judah when the elders of Judah came. Okay, my questions for Brian. What is your conclusion now you know this? I've addressed all your objections and showed that they do not stand, they do not hold. Will you try to study the Zadok calendar a bit more? And yeah, also, but not that important, I'm curious to know what calendar are you following at the moment? And why are you doing so? Okay, we are at the end of my teaching. If you want to know more or want to comment, you can send an email to avivalef@gmail.com, and you can also ask for a PDF version of my teaching. But feel free to comment on my channel as well. Thanks very much for watching this teaching till the end. I wish you a great day. All the best. Shalom.